Hi, my name is Jillian. I am 28 years old. They don't care about you. Your father and stepmother only care about the secret hidden in that house. That chilling statement was whispered into my ear by the attending doctor the moment I woke up in my hospital bed after a severe traffic accident. My entire body was aching intensely, but his incredibly tense gaze as he leaned over to check my wounds brought me to full consciousness. Right after the warning, the doctor quickly left the room to avoid suspicion, leaving me in utter shock and forcing me to uncover the truth on my own. Despite the agonizing pain tearing through me, I forcefully yanked out my IV line, gritted my teeth, and dragged my heavy feet step by step toward the slightly ajar door. I pressed my ear against the crack, and the blood in my veins seemed to freeze as I directly overheard the conversation between my biological father and stepmother in the hallway. "We have to find the map to the basement before she recovers." Their cold, calculating voices echoed clearly. That cruel reality shattered all my illusions about family and froze my heart right there in the cold hospital corridor. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to join me in exposing the true colors of this deceitful family. 3 days after being discharged from the hospital, the taxi slowly drove me back to the old brick mansion in Savannah, Georgia. I looked out the window, observing the traffic behind us. As the vehicle rolled past the main hospital gates and turned onto the highway, I casually glanced into the rearview mirror. My stomach instantly dropped. I clearly spotted the familiar dark SUV belonging to my father, Carl, tailing closely behind us in the next lane. They did not even try to hide their presence. They had been watching my every move, proving they tracked me right from the start. I gripped the edge of my seat, forcing myself to remain completely still and not alert the driver. Staring at that vehicle, the painful memories immediately rushed back. I was only 12 years old when my mother passed away from a sudden illness. Instead of staying to comfort his grieving daughter, Carl quickly packed his belongings into cardboard boxes. He left the house within a year, taking off with my stepmother, Carolyn. They relocated to another city, completely abandoning me. I was discarded like a burden left behind to face the tragedy and navigate my teenage years alone without any financial or emotional support. I survived only because my grandmother Beatrice stepped in and took me under her wing. I grew up under her strict but highly dedicated care in this exact house. She did not just provide me with food and shelter. She spent years teaching me the meticulous skills of antique art appraisal. I learned how to examine oil paintings, authenticate historical documents, and evaluate centuries-old artifacts. When she passed away recently, her finalized will left her entire estate, including this massive Savannah mansion, strictly for me to manage and own. Carl's sudden interest in my well-being after the accident was a blatant lie, and I knew exactly the reason behind it. I remembered the tense event right after Beatrice's funeral. Carl had unexpectedly barged into the lawyer's office during the reading of the documents. He aggressively demanded access to a secret appendix mentioned in the paperwork. As her only living son, I possess the absolute legal right to know what else is hidden in that estate. Carl had argued loudly, slamming his hands on the desk. The lawyer firmly denied his request, explicitly stating the appendix and its contents were exclusively designated for me. That specific confrontation explained exactly how Carl knew valuable assets were actively concealed somewhere on the property. Furthermore, while sorting through Beatrice's remaining mail a month ago, I found highly alarming records. I discovered a stack of printed emails showing Carl secretly contacting elite property valuation firms. The timestamps revealed he initiated these inquiries just days after she died. He had been aggressively researching the black market value of colonial-era artifacts, specialized preservation methods, and historical real estate in Savannah. This paper trail proved his malicious intentions were calculated and brewing long before my accident ever happened. The taxi finally arrived at the estate. I paid the fare, stepped inside the quiet house, and securely locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I desperately needed rest, but the fragile peace was shattered mere hours later. Heavy, demanding knocks echoed through the main hallway. I walked over, turned the deadbolt, and opened the front door. I found Carl and Carolyn standing on the porch, flanked by several large, heavy suitcases. "You are severely injured and need proper care, so we are moving in to look after you," Carl declared, immediately pushing his way past me into the foyer. "We couldn't possibly let our daughter recover all by herself," Carolyn added with a forced smile, dragging her luggage directly across the antique hardwood floor without waiting for permission. "They used the righteous excuse of parental duty to force their presence into my home, trapping me under the same roof with their relentless greed." On Monday morning of the first week living together, the quietness of the mansion was broken by covert surveillance actions. Carolyn completely took over the kitchen space, acting as if she owned the property. While preparing breakfast, her eyes constantly darted downward, staring intensely at the antique oak floorboards beneath her feet. She stomped her heel lightly against the wood a few times, testing the sound. "This floor seems a bit hollow. Carl and I will check it out later to ensure your safety," Carolyn announced loudly, clearly probing for my reaction. I maintained complete silence. I slowly poured a glass of water and swallowed my prescribed painkillers right in front of them, intentionally projecting the image of a weak, exhausted patient. I nodded vaguely and shuffled toward the living room, but my mind was entirely alert. I covertly monitored their activities throughout the afternoon. They were not even trying to be subtle anymore. The heavy Persian rugs in the main living area were blatantly rolled up at the corners, exposing the bare wooden planks underneath. I even noticed fresh metallic scratches near the iron floor vents, indicating someone had already tried to pry them open while I was resting. Later that evening, I walked down the main corridor and found more undeniable evidence. The thick layers of dust along the wooden baseboards were heavily disturbed, leaving clear, uneven swipe marks across the surface. Someone had run their fingers or a metal tool along the tight gaps between the floor and the wall, desperately searching for a hidden latch or a loose board. These physical traces perfectly matched the exact direction of the secret conversation I had overheard back at the hospital. They were exclusively focusing their search beneath the floorboards. I immediately retreated to my bedroom and securely locked the heavy solid wood door behind me. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Sterling. I needed concrete evidence about the structural layout of this estate, and his position allowed him to access specific municipal databases without raising any red flags. "I need a massive favor right now." I spoke quietly into the receiver. "Can you access the anonymous architectural archives for the Savannah Historical District? I need the original structural layout of my grandmother's property. Give me a few minutes to bypass the standard public portal. I will run a deep search through the digitized historical records." Sterling replied professionally, immediately understanding the strict urgency in my voice. I paced around my locked room, listening carefully to the muffled sounds of Carl dragging something heavy across the floor downstairs. They were wasting absolutely no time. About 20 minutes later, my phone finally buzzed with an encrypted email notification, followed instantly by an incoming call from Sterling. I found the original blueprint drafted in 1890. Sterling confirmed through the speaker, his tone serious and direct. However, I also uncovered a highly classified renovation note dated 1936. This secondary document clearly shows a massive, unrecorded secret hollow space constructed directly beneath the primary floor layer, right above the old wine cellar. I quickly opened the attached scanned document on my screen. The faded black ink outlined a complex grid of support beams. Right in the center, a distinct void was deliberately mapped out, but intentionally omitted from all modern public records. Beatrice had known about this hidden space all along. Carl clearly knew something valuable was hidden down there, which explained his relentless push to forcefully move into my home. Now armed with the exact coordinates provided by Sterling, I held the ultimate advantage over their blind search. I memorized the precise location marked on the 1936 schematic, deleted the email permanently to cover my tracks, and formulated my next move. Late on Friday night, faint electronic beeps pulled me out of my empty bed. I held my breath, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the nightstand, and moved soundlessly out of my room. I crept down the grand wooden staircase, carefully avoiding the steps I knew would creak. The house was completely dark save for the pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows. I navigated the ground floor strictly by memory, heading straight toward the narrow corridor that connected the main house to the old wine cellar. The rhythmic beeping grew louder, guiding my stealthy approach. I stopped behind the thick doorframe, peering around the edge. In the dim glow of a small lantern, I clearly saw Carl crouching awkwardly on the floor. He was slowly sweeping a handheld metal detector back and forth across the aged oak planks. The device emitted sharp, localized chirps. "The signal is definitely stronger right in this corner," Carl whispered intensely to the woman kneeling beside him. Carolyn did not respond immediately. She held a crumpled copy of a hand-drawn schematic in her left hand, constantly referencing it. With her right hand, she used a retractable measuring tape to carefully calculate the exact distance from the stone wall. After marking a spot with her finger, she curled her hand into a fist and used her knuckles to knock rhythmically on each individual wooden board. She pressed her ear close to the surface, intensely checking the resonance to identify the exact hollow void hidden beneath the solid flooring. They operated with the precision of experienced thieves focused on their illicit excavation. I watched them work for several minutes, documenting their exact methods in my mind. Carl adjusted the sensitivity dial on his metal detector, narrowing down the search radius. Carolyn kept tapping her face, contorted with greedy anticipation every time the wood produced a deeper echo. They were dangerously close to the exact coordinates of the hidden chamber. If I let them continue for another hour, they would undoubtedly pry the floorboards open. I had seen enough. It was time to shut down their little midnight expedition. I stepped out from behind the doorframe, reached for the main switch panel on the wall, and immediately flicked on the bright hallway lights. The sudden illumination flooded the corridor, completely exposing them. Carl violently flinched, nearly dropping his metal detector before frantically shoving the device behind his back like a criminal. Carolyn gasped loudly, her eyes wide with sheer panic, as she clumsily crumpled the sketch paper and forcefully shoved it deep into the pocket of her oversized coat. They froze, staring at me with expressions of pure terror and caught in the act guilt. The silence stretched for a few agonizing seconds before Carl finally managed to compose his features. He forced a highly unnatural, strained smile, desperately trying to project the warm tone of a caring parent. "I was just checking the foundation," Carl stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "I was worried the heavy rain from earlier this week might cause severe subsidence. The structural integrity of these old houses can fail unexpectedly, and I simply wanted to ensure the ground was stable enough so you would not be in any danger." His pathetic excuse insulted my intelligence, but I maintained a perfectly neutral expression. I nodded slowly, deliberately pretending to believe his ridiculous lie about protecting my safety. "Thank you for your concern. Everything is fine, so please go back to your room and rest," I commanded with a calm, unwavering voice. I stood my ground and watched coldly as Carl and Carolyn hurriedly gathered their tools and scurried upstairs. I remained alone in the quiet hallway, staring at the exact spot they had marked. Outwardly, I played the naive victim, but internally, I had already finalized the ultimate move to expose these two greedy individuals. On Tuesday morning of the following week, I decided to create the perfect golden opportunity to lure the predators out into the open. I deliberately packed a medium-sized suitcase with random clothing and dragged it down the grand wooden staircase to the main foyer. Carl and Carolyn were already awake, pretending to read the morning newspaper in the adjacent dining room. I walked in, projecting a highly serious and professional expression to sell the lie. A private client in Charleston just called with an urgent request to appraise a newly discovered antique collection. I announced clearly, making sure they both heard every single word. "I have to leave immediately, and I will be away from the house for at least 2 days." Carl's posture instantly changed. He almost dropped his coffee mug, scrambling to his feet with unnatural, overflowing enthusiasm. He completely abandoned his usual sluggish morning routine. Let me help you with that right away. Carl offered eagerly, practically snatching the suitcase handle directly from my firm grip. He rushed out the front door, practically sprinting down the brick steps. He effortlessly lifted the heavy bag and shoved it roughly into the trunk of my car. He hurried back to the porch, clapping his hands together and repeatedly urging me to hit the road early so I would not face any terrible highway traffic or unexpected delays. Carolyn followed him outside, standing beside the porch railing with a highly forced, sympathetic posture. Rest assured and focus entirely on your work. Carl and I will carefully watch over the house while you are gone. Carolyn promised, smoothly flashing a bright, reassuring smile. However, she severely failed to conceal the malicious gleam of sheer triumph dancing in her eyes. They both genuinely believed they had finally won the waiting game. I gave them one last brief nod, slipped into the driver's seat and firmly shut the car door, completely cutting off their fake display of affection. I started the engine and drove steadily down the long asphalt driveway, watching them wave enthusiastically in the rearview mirror until I turned the corner. I navigated through a few residential streets, strictly adhering to the speed limit to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention from neighbors. Once I reached the commercial district about 2 miles away, I sharply turned the steering wheel and pulled into the massive, sparsely populated parking lot of an abandoned supermarket. I parked my vehicle securely behind a row of overgrown, untrimmed bushes, completely out of sight from the main road and passing traffic. I pulled out my cell phone and immediately drafted a secure text message to Sterling. I instructed him to keep his phone unmuted and remain on high alert. I am executing the final phase of the plan right now. Stay by your phone and be absolutely ready to contact the county police. Dispatch the exact second I send you the SOS signal. I typed rapidly, hitting send and waiting just long enough to see his brief confirmation reply. I switched the device to silent mode and slipped it deep into my jacket pocket. I left the car locked and hidden in the desolate lot. I pulled up my jacket hood and began walking briskly toward the dense strip of pine forest bordering the back of the residential neighborhoods. I navigated the familiar dirt trails I used to explore as a teenager, carefully stepping over dry branches to maintain absolute silence. The thick, dark tree cover provided excellent camouflage as I stealthily approached the rear perimeter of my own property. I retrieved a rusted spare key from my pocket, slipped it into the back door lock, turned it without making a single click, and silently let myself back into the mansion. Exactly 45 minutes after my fake departure, I stood inside the dark, suffocating space of the underground cellar. The heavy, rhythmic thuds of a sledgehammer echoed violently directly above my head. Fine dust and small wood splinters drifted down from the ceiling with every brutal strike. They were aggressively tearing apart the main floorboards. Hit that corner hard, the schematic clearly shows it's right under this stone slab. Carl growled loudly, his voice easily piercing through the deteriorating wooden planks. I could hear Carolyn grunting with exertion as she dragged heavy debris out of their excavation path. They were completely blinded by their absolute greed, entirely unaware of my presence just a few feet beneath them. I ignored the chaotic noise above and focused strictly on my task. I aimed my flashlight at the arched brick wall at the far end of the cellar. Beatrice had never explicitly pointed out this specific corner, but her rigorous training guided my eyes. I stepped closer, wiping away a thick layer of cobwebs and grime from the damp masonry. I closely inspected the uneven mortar joints. Finally, I found it. Deeply carved into one of the seemingly ordinary stone blocks were tiny geometric symbols. I retrieved Beatrice's peculiar key from my pocket. I carefully held the heavy metal piece under the flashlight beam, meticulously comparing the intricate grooves cut into its shaft with the hidden engravings on the wall. They matched perfectly. I pressed the tip of the key directly into the center of the carved stone. It slid into a concealed mechanical slot. I gripped the base firmly and turned it hard to the right. A loud metallic click resonated through the enclosed space, briefly overpowering the hammering upstairs. The solid brick block suddenly shifted inward. I pulled it back. A highly advanced, rust-proof steel compartment slowly slid out from the decaying brickwork, gliding smoothly on hidden ball bearings. I reached into the cold steel drawer and carefully extracted 3 specialized preservation tubes. These were professional-grade airtight cylinders designed explicitly to protect sensitive artifacts from severe moisture and temperature fluctuations. I quickly unscrewed the sealed cap of the first tube and directed my light inside. There they were. Rolled meticulously inside the protective casing were 3 original 18th century oil paintings. Right beside the canvases rested several folded parchment sheets. I pulled one out slightly to verify the text. They were the original certificates of authenticity and the official ownership records legally establishing the undeniable provenance of these priceless historical masterpieces. This was the true legacy Beatrice had successfully hidden from Carl's greedy grasp. Time was running out. The ceiling above me shook violently as another section of the floor collapsed under Carl's sledgehammer. I quickly sealed the cap back onto the preservation tube. I unzipped my personal backpack and carefully slid all 3 cylinders into the main compartment, ensuring they were tightly secured and padded against my spare clothes. These documents and paintings were the ultimate proof of my rightful inheritance, and I now had them firmly in my possession. I zipped the bag shut and swung it over my shoulders, adjusting the straps tightly across my chest. I stepped back from the exposed steel drawer, leaving it completely open and empty. I moved silently across the dirt floor, retreating until my back pressed firmly against the heavy steel security door at the cellar entrance. I reached down and firmly clicked off my flashlight. Absolute darkness instantly swallowed the underground chamber. I stood completely still, held my breath, and waited patiently for the 2 intruders above to finally break through the remaining floorboards. 15 minutes after I securely fastened my backpack, the cellar ceiling cracked violently, and the rotting plywood layer collapsed completely into the underground space. A thick, suffocating cloud of dust billowed into the stagnant air. Carl dropped his sledgehammer and jumped down through the opening, landing heavily on the dirt floor. Carolyn followed closely behind him, coughing aggressively and waving her hands to clear her vision. They completely ignored their surroundings and rushed straight toward the exposed brick wall. Carl shoved his hands forcefully into the open steel compartment, frantically scraping his fingers around the cold interior. When he realized he was grasping absolutely nothing, he let out a furious scream of sheer anger. Carolyn shrieked in disbelief, clawing at the empty drawer, realizing their anticipated treasure was completely missing. I silently stepped out from the deep, concealing shadows in the far corner of the damp room. I raised my heavy flashlight and flicked the switch, aiming the blinding high-intensity beam directly into their faces. The sudden light sliced sharply through the dusty darkness. Carl and Carolyn instantly froze, instinctively raising their arms to shield their eyes. As their vision adjusted, sheer shock and total bewilderment washed over their pale faces. They stood completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the daughter they firmly believed was driving on a highway miles away. The momentary silence shattered as the harsh realization finally hit them. Carl's calculating eyes darted rapidly from my face down to the bulging straps of the backpack secured tightly across my chest. "What the hell are you doing here? Give me that backpack right now." Carl barked viciously, completely discarding his meticulously crafted facade of a caring father. He lunged forward with aggressive speed, closing the distance between us in 2 rapid strides. He reached out violently and grabbed my wrist with a crushing, threatening grip, attempting to forcefully yank me forward to strip the bag from my shoulders. I completely refused to be intimidated by his sudden physical aggression. "Let go of my arm. You have absolutely no right to touch anything in this house," I stated with cold, unwavering authority. Using my entire body weight, I violently yanked my arm backward, successfully breaking his harsh grip. Without hesitating for a single second, I rapidly retreated backward, swiftly slipping my body through the heavy, reinforced steel doorframe of the cellar entrance. Carl recovered his balance and charged toward the exit, his face contorted in absolute rage, but he was a fraction of a second too late. I grabbed the heavy iron handle and slammed the thick steel door shut with all my strength. The massive metal slab hit the frame with a deafening crash. I instantly threw my shoulder against the exterior surface and aggressively pulled the heavy mechanical deadbolt across the outer latch. The solid steel pin slid securely into place, locking the mechanism tight. Heavy fists pounded furiously against the metal from the inside, accompanied by muffled screaming, but I completely ignored their desperate resistance. They were now securely trapped in the suffocating darkness of the underground chamber. I did not waste another single second listening to their pathetic shouting echoing through the heavy door. I immediately pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket. My fingers moved rapidly as I opened my active message thread with Sterling. I pressed the emergency SOS signal we had prearranged and hit send without any hesitation. I needed him to contact the county police dispatch right away and direct their patrol units straight to the property to handle the situation. By detaining the intruders temporarily and immediately alerting law enforcement, I guaranteed my defensive actions remained entirely within the strict legal framework of residential property protection. Less than 10 minutes after the emergency signal was transmitted, the piercing wail of police sirens tore violently through the quiet suburban atmosphere. Multiple county patrol cruisers aggressively pulled into the mansion's long driveway, their flashing red and blue lights illuminating the dark property. Several uniformed officers rushed through the front door, guided inside by Sterling, who had arrived simultaneously to coordinate the immediate response. I met them in the main corridor, directed them straight toward the cellar entrance, and firmly unlocked the heavy steel door at their strict command. The police officers immediately swarmed the dusty underground chamber, shouting firm commands. They forcefully restrained Carl and Carolyn, pinning their arms behind their backs and snapping cold metal handcuffs tightly around their wrists. The physical evidence of their crime was absolutely undeniable. The officers swiftly confiscated the heavy sledgehammer, the crowbar, the specialized lock-picking tools, and the meticulously marked architectural schematic that Carolyn still clutched in her trembling hand. They were aggressively escorted up the wooden stairs, completely humiliated, and shoved roughly into the back of separate patrol vehicles. The commanding officer officially charged them on the spot with severe criminal property damage, attempted grand burglary, and unlawful trespassing, fully adhering to the strict penal codes of the state. The very next morning, I drove directly to my attorney's office in downtown Savannah without shedding a single tear. I formally filed for a permanent restraining order against Carl and Carolyn, legally prohibiting them from ever approaching me, my residence, or my workplace again. Furthermore, I initiated the complex legal paperwork to completely strip Carl of any potential future inheritance rights or familial claims. I permanently severed all legal and personal ties with the man who had heartlessly abandoned me years ago. There would be absolutely no negotiations and zero reconciliation. Over the following months, the 3 18th-century oil paintings underwent a rigorous, highly secure authentication process. Independent art historians and elite appraisers meticulously verified their historical origins using the ownership documents Beatrice had perfectly preserved. Once their immense value was officially certified by the experts, the masterpieces were placed on the legal auction block at a prestigious national gallery. The final auction bids far exceeded all initial estimates, securing a massive financial return. I received a staggering multi-million-dollar sum, which I strategically utilized to fully restore the historical architecture of the Savannah Mansion to its original glory. Furthermore, I established a specialized art preservation foundation in Beatrice's honor to financially support young appraisers. Carl and Carolyn were currently sitting in a state penitentiary awaiting a trial that would inevitably result in years of federal prison time. I walked through the newly renovated halls of my home, finally claiming the absolute freedom I had always deserved. On behalf of the channel, we proudly present this story for educational purposes. It delivers a powerful message about establishing strict personal boundaries and handling severe family crises using cold logic and the legal system rather than submitting to emotional manipulation. Objectively evaluating the situation, the female protagonist decisively protected herself by permanently cutting all legal and personal ties with her toxic relatives. Her defensive actions were highly calculated and legally sound. Meanwhile, the ruthless villains suffered the inevitable devastating criminal consequences resulting directly from their own blind greed. From the exact moment I watched the police cruisers transport them away under the flashing red lights, several sharp truths became undeniably clear to me. Familial blood relations do not ever grant a free pass for limitless greed and continuous deception. A father who cruelly abandoned you in your darkest hours will never return out of pure, unconditional love. You must never fight malicious intent with weak emotions, useless tears, or blind forgiveness. Toxic people will only exploit those vulnerabilities to drain your resources. True justice is achieved when you apply cold, calculated logic. Utilizing the absolute power of the legal system is the most effective weapon to neutralize predators and send them straight into the penal system. I want to send my deepest gratitude to all of you who patiently listened to my journey for the truth until the very last second. What are your honest thoughts on my uncompromising decision to legally banish my biological father from my life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel to accompany us in the next real-life stories.